loans and that kind of thing. So I went to Georgia Tech for 2 years, did relatively well, but then my dad died, and we had a large family, and I had to take a year off and help support the family, just not from a monetary point of view, but from a support point of view, moral support and just family matters. And during that time, this is 1970 now, 71 actually, there was a lot going on socially in the world, and my views of life kind of changed. And even though I liked math and science, the steady diet of it at Georgia Tech was, I felt like I was isolated when all this stuff was going on politically and socially in the late 60s, early 70s. So I decided to switch majors and pursue a legal program. Actually, it was criminal justice, political science at that level. And I applied at different schools in the New York City area. There was a joint program with the Brooklyn Center of Long Island University, with NYU and the John Jay School of Criminal Justice, that you took courses at the different schools. And I really liked that. I graduated fine. I was going, my family by that time had moved to the Washington, D.C. area, Alexandria, Virginia to be specific. And I decided to move down that way and apply for a federal job. I was interested in the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration and then go back for a master's degree. At the time, it was real big with Richard Nixon. It was supplying all kinds of criminal justice things and police things. But right around the time that I moved to Alexandria, it was Jimmy Carter was just coming in, and he had zero-based budgeting and reduction in force called RIFs, and they abolished the Law Enforcement Administration. So my timing wasn't too good on that. So I was applying for all kinds of jobs. The jobs were tight at the time. So to make ends meet, I took a job with a local airline called Henson Aviation, which served Maryland, Delaware, and Eastern Shore of Virginia. And I was a customer service representative. One thing led to another, and I got a management trainee job with Eastern Airlines. That's what is now Reagan National Airport. And Dulles Airport, which is an international airport out in the suburbs of Virginia. And I was doing relatively well there, you know, I enjoyed the job. I learned a lot about customer relations, but it was my first real exposure to computers since I was at Georgia Tech. At Georgia Tech, back in 1970, your computer science courses were stacks and stacks of punch cards that got inputted into a mainframe computer. And if you ever dropped the cards or got them out of order, you were in a big bind. But anyway, that was my first exposure. At Eastern Airlines, being a management trainee, they were doing this cross-utilization of personnel. Up until then, if you had one job, whether it was ticket counter or control center or operations, you pretty much stayed there your whole life. But they were having this cross-utilization, and I really liked that. So that was my first exposure to real hands-on computing, although it wasn't programming, it was using computers. They had what they called terminals back then. They looked like monitors with a keyboard, but it was connected to a mainframe. In this case, it was Doral, Florida. So I got a real interest in computers then, and right about then, the first PCs were coming out. This is the early 80s. And you all know about Steve Jobs coming out with the Apple computers in the early 80s, and Microsoft soon followed. I got an interest in maybe doing some programming. Well, in 1985, I was doing a vacation relief shift where I had to be at work at 6 a.m. I was normally like a 3 to 11 p.m. person. It was a Saturday night, and I figured, well, I'd be a good boy and stay in the night, just watch TV, and, you know, get up at 4:30 in the morning. And I was watching TV in my bedroom, and during a commercial, figured I'd run down and get something to eat real quick and bring it back up. Well, I fell down the stairs. You know that old adage that your mother says, don't run, you'll break your neck?
Right.
Well, that's what happened. I fell back on my neck, and I had a pre-existing condition that I really didn't know about, but it was a rare form of arthritis that calcifies your spine, but it was just starting to calcify in my, what they call the C4-5 area,
Yes.
just kind of midway to the lower part of your neck. And at the time I felt pain, but I thought it was right in that area, like to be massaged when you're stressed and all that. So I thought it was something related to that. I had no idea. Well, anyway, when I fell, that part of my spine couldn't absorb the fall like your spine would normally probably do. So it cracked right there, and I became a quadriplegic. This was I lived in the Mount Vernon section of Alexandria. Ended up in Mount Vernon Hospital for 6 months. And then I got transferred to the University of Virginia Hospital, which is sort of like Jefferson and McGee are here. There's spinal cord injury centers all around the country. And that was the local one for me. So that's in Charlottesville. And the rehab, I spent another 6 months there because I had a lot of medical problems. So about a total of a year and 2 months in the hospital. Then I got transferred to a rehab center similar to McGee, called Woodrow Wilson Rehab Center, which is in Fishersville, Virginia, which is between Charlottesville and Harrisonburg, Virginia. And I got visited by my insurance company. I was on long-term disability, and you know, they wanted to get you off disability. Well, we set up a meeting for the insurance company to come in. And a lady came in, and I was waiting for her in the room. And I could tell by her eyes and body language that, oh Lord, this guy's never going to be employable. So we had a good talk, but sure enough, when the report came back, it was worded such that with the state of technology as it is, he might be employable sometime down the road, but at this time he is not employable. So they were willing basically just to pay my benefits. But my goal was, when I spent all that time in the hospital, I decided, well, what do I want to do? I could lay back and die like a lot of people do, but I wanted to work again. And I had a lot of naysayers. Doctor telling, well, you'll need 24-hour care, and your bowel and bladder will never be the same, and you may be in bed a lot, and blah, blah, blah. And I decided to not dwell on what I couldn't do, but try to find things I could do. And this is where the adaptive technology comes in. When the insurance company rejected me, the Department of Rehabilitation Services said they would take me up as long as eventually they find for me an independent way to access a computer. So the rehab center, I ended up staying there 2 years, had a short program in COBOL, a language of COBOL, and DOS, and BASIC, but it was all mainframe computer. And I did well at that, but I didn't have any way to input into a computer. They had somebody type for me, and you could imagine having to sit next to somebody that's telling you, move up 3, move left 2, hit the F12 key, and you know, all kinds of things. It was frustrating. It wasn't independent. It wasn't all that functional. Although I did pass the program. About the same time, we're talking about 1988. The state of Virginia had a special program where they were linking with private businesses to come up with new technologies. And one of them was a company called LC Technologies in Fairfax, Virginia, who developed eye gaze technology. And what this was, it came out with a computer and they brought it down to the rehab center, where there's a keyboard on the screen and you look with there's a camera below the screen, and you look with your eyes at the keyboard. And it's calibrated so that it looks to see where your pupil's looking at. And you'd leave it at a certain pre-calibrated time on a letter, and it would type the letter. And the idea was to use that with what they call word technology, which you can think of as Microsoft Word. When you type in a letter, a menu would come up, and it would try to guess what word you were trying to type. And as you typed further, the menu would change to different words that it was trying to. But the word predict technology wasn't very good back then. So you're basically typing letters. And although the eye gaze was good, and it could have been a possibility for me, because functionally I could only move my lips and eyes, so I couldn't use a mouse stick. There was some sip and puff technology I tried where you sip and it scans to a letter in the alphabet, and you sip again and it stops on that letter and types it. But again, it wasn't too functional, it was very slow. And I could probably use it for my personal stuff, but not an employment situation. So at the same time, drag and dictate, the original voice input had just come out. But back then, computers were slower, there was no memory. And it was very, very crude, made a lot of mistakes. So that wasn't too functional either. Right around that time, we thought, well, maybe the eye gaze would work for me if we got better word predict programs. By then, the rehab center said, you gotta leave. So, this is not a place to live. So my options were, I was still having some medical problems. So living in the community at the time was not really an option. So I applied to a whole bunch of different nursing facilities. Some were geriatric. I was on a waiting list for a place called the Virginia Home, which is a home for physically disabled. There's another one here in Philadelphia called Inglis House. And I ended up there. And when I came here, I expressed my desire to go back to work, but the issue of assistive technology came up. I applied through OBR in 1990, and took a few years, but they finally accepted me. I had to prove myself, though. There was a school called the DMD.Eliot Spindel in Philadelphia, which was sort of like the Computer Learning Center. I don't know if they're still around, I don't think so. But basically, it's like a year or two course and you learn computers. So I wanted to learn personal computers. I knew a little bit about mainframes. So OBR took me on, but I had to first prove that I had the aptitude to do computer programming. Once I did that, we had to find a way for me to functionally input into a computer. By then computers had come up to what they called 286 machines, which still didn't have a lot of speed memory compared to nowadays. And we were on Windows 3.1 had recently come out. And OBR hired Janet and Michael Fiore, a small consulting group at the time, to evaluate me to see what would work best for inputting into a computer. So we had the eye gaze people come out from Virginia, and we tested it out at the DMD.Eliot. And there were a few problems. One was, but this is at the time, it's a lot better now, it's still around, was it was at its very beginning, the cost was really prohibitive. Secondly, it was kind of bulky, so it wasn't really very mobile. And third, at the time, because of lighting in classrooms, that created a problem. So my part of the classroom would have to be dark. But not so much now, from what I've read about it. But so Janet and Michael started me on what was the original Drag and Dictate. And Janet basically taught me over, I don't know, what, about a year it took. And to put some timeline on this, I remember talking to Michael and about the stock market, and back then the stock market was it just reached a high of 1,300. And now it's between 11 and 13,000, depending on how the economy is doing at the moment.